Before we begin, wherever you're listening from, whether it's a quiet town, a busy city, or a peaceful countryside, this story is for you. Settle into your favorite chair or rest your head on your pillow. Let the worries of today drift away as we travel back more than 2,000 years to a land of misty hills, ancient oak forests, and warm fires, glowing inside humble stone cottages. If these stories bring you comfort, please subscribe and leave a comment so we can continue sharing journeys through history that soothe the heart and calm the mind. Before cities rose, before written words defined truth, before kingdoms drew borders on land, there was silence, not an empty silence, but a living one. A silence filled with wind moving through endless forests, rivers carving paths through stone, and mountains standing like ancient guardians of forgotten time. This was Europe, thousands of years ago, and within it lived a people who did not try to conquer nature. They became part of it. They were called the Celts. The Celtic world stretched across vast territories that would one day become Ireland, Scotland, Wales, France, and parts of Central Europe. But to the Celts, these were not countries. They were living spirits. Forests were not resources. They were homes of unseen forces. Rivers were not water routes. They were sacred veins of the earth. Mountains were not obstacles. They were ancient watchers. Life here was not easy. Cold winters wrapped the land in silence. Rain painted the world in endless shades of gray. Wild forests hid danger in every shadow. But the Celts did not fear the land. They listened to it. As dawn breaks, life begins. Fire crackles in stone hearths. Smoke rises slowly into the morning air. Women prepare food with quiet rhythm. Children run barefoot between wooden huts, laughing. Men sharpen bronze weapons and prepare for hunting or farming. But this was not a life of chaos. It was a life of balance. Every action had meaning. Every tool had purpose. Every day followed the rhythm of nature. At night, the village would gather around firelight, and the world would transform into story. Among the Celts existed figures wrapped in mystery, the Druids. They were not kings, they were not warriors, yet they held more power than both. They were teachers, healers, judges, and storytellers of truth. They studied the stars to understand time. They read the movement of animals to interpret signs. They memorized thousands of oral histories without ever writing them down. To them, knowledge was sacred, and silence was wisdom. One druid once said, "The world speaks, but only to those who stop to listen." The Celts believed that reality was not just what the eyes could see. There was another world, a hidden realm. They called it the Otherworld. It was not heaven, it was not hell, it was something in between. A place where spirits lived beyond death, where time moved differently, where gods and ancestors still walked. And sometimes, the boundary between worlds weakened, especially during the night of Samhain. On those nights, the Celts believed the dead could return, not always in fear, but sometimes in guidance. The Celtic people were not united under one kingdom. They lived in tribes, and tribes protected themselves. Warriors were deeply respected, not because of violence, but because of courage. They fought with decorated shields, iron weapons, and fierce loyalty to their people. Before battle, they painted their bodies with natural dyes, not for fear, but for identity. When they charged into battle, they believed they carried the strength of their ancestors with them. But war was not the heart of Celtic life. Nature was. Trees were sacred, especially the oak. Rivers were offerings of life. Animals were respected as messengers of balance. Even death was not an end, but a return. Every spiral carved into stone, every knot in their art, represented eternity. Life had no beginning and no end, only cycles. In one small village near the edge of a great forest lived a young storyteller. He was not a warrior, he was not a druid, but he carried something powerful: memory. He listened to elders speak of forgotten battles, ancient kings and spirits that walked between worlds. And slowly, he began to feel something calling him beyond the village. A journey not yet understood, but destined. One night, the wind changed. The forest no longer felt still. It felt alive. Drums echoed faintly in the distance, though no one was seen. The fire flickered strangely, and the storyteller felt it. A pull, not from outside, but from within. The world was about to reveal something hidden for centuries. As dawn broke over the hills, the mist began to lift. The Celtic world stood unchanged, yet alive with unseen tension. Something ancient was awakening. A truth buried in time, and the storyteller took his first step beyond the village, into the unknown. The sun lingered low above the western hills, bathing the valleys in warm, amber light. For many, it looked like an ordinary autumn evening, but for the Celtic people, nothing about this day was ordinary. This was the final sunset before Samhain. The harvest had ended. Fields that had been alive with grain now stood quiet. The animals had been gathered close to the village. Wood had been stacked beside every home. Food had been carefully stored for the long winter ahead. The air carried the scent of damp earth, smoke, and fallen leaves. Nature itself seemed to pause, as though waiting for something ancient to awaken. The elders moved through the village in silence. No one laughed as loudly as usual. Children sensed the change without fully understanding it. Even the dogs remained unusually calm, because everyone knew. Tonight marked the end of one year and the beginning of another. For the Celts, time did not begin on the first day of spring. It began with darkness. Winter was not simply a season. It was a reminder that every ending carried the promise of another beginning. As darkness slowly covered the hills, the Druids climbed toward the highest hill overlooking the valley. This was the sacred place, the place where the year's final fire would die, and a new fire would be born. Each family allowed the hearth inside their home to burn low. Soon, every fire in the village disappeared. The darkness grew deeper. Without fire, the village felt unfamiliar. The silence became almost overwhelming. Only the wind whispered through the oak trees. The Druids believed that all light should disappear before the sacred flame was kindled. Old burdens, old grief, old mistakes, all were left behind with the dying embers. When the first sacred flame appeared, life itself would begin again. Night finally arrived. No moon shone above the forest. Only countless stars watched from the heavens. The Druids raised their hands toward the sky. Ancient words echoed across the hills. Words no longer remembered by history. To outsiders, it might have sounded like prayer. To the Celts, it was conversation. A conversation with the unseen world. For on this single night, the veil between the living and the other world, it became thinner than at any other time. Ancestors could return. Spirits might walk unseen through the forest. Some brought wisdom, others carried sorrow, and a few brought warnings. Across every household, families prepared an extra place at the evening meal. Bread rested upon wooden tables. Fresh apples were carefully arranged. Warm stew simmered quietly over newly lit hearths. No one expected to see a ghost sitting beside them. Instead, these simple acts expressed love. They honored those who had walked these same paths long before. Grandparents, parents, children who had left too soon. The Celts believed that love did not disappear with death. It simply crossed into another world. As the fire flickered, many quietly whispered names that history would never record. Yet those names remained alive. Inside memory, among those gathered, the young storyteller from our first chapter could not ignore the feeling inside him. The forest called again. It was not fear, nor curiosity. It felt like recognition, as though someone waited. Leaving the warmth of the village, he stepped quietly beneath towering oak branches. The deeper he walked, the quieter the world became. Even the wind seemed unwilling to disturb the silence. Until, far ahead, a single blue light appeared between the trees. The young storyteller takes one more step. The blue light grows brighter. Then, a voice speaks, not from behind him, not from ahead, but from everywhere at once. You have remembered us. And with those words, the forest no longer belongs to the living alone. The forest stood silent, not the ordinary silence of a peaceful night, but the kind of silence that makes every heartbeat sound louder. The young storyteller remained motionless beneath the towering oak trees. The mysterious blue light hovered only a few steps ahead. It neither flickered nor faded. Instead, it seemed to breathe. Around him, the mist slowly curled across the forest floor like gentle waves upon a quiet sea. Every instinct urged him to turn back. Yet another feeling, older than fear, pulled him forward. Then the voice returned, soft, calm, neither a man's voice nor a woman's. It echoed as though spoken by the forest itself. You remember what others have forgotten. The storyteller looked around. No one stood beside him, only ancient trees whose roots had witnessed countless generations. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the blue light began drifting deeper into the woods, almost as if inviting him to follow. And without fully understanding why, he did.
The path narrowed, branches twisted overhead like the arms of forgotten giants. The farther he walked, the quieter the forest became. No birds sang, no leaves rustled, even the wind had disappeared. Then, the trees suddenly opened. Before him stood a great circle of weathered stones. Each stone towered higher than a man. Ancient spiral symbols covered their surfaces. Soft blue light shimmered across every carving. The storyteller slowly stepped into the center. The moment his foot touched the earth, the stones began to glow, one after another, like stars awakening in the darkness. The ground beneath him trembled ever so slightly, not with violence, but with recognition.
From the brightest light, a figure slowly emerged. An old man, tall, wrapped in flowing white robes. His long silver hair moved without wind. His eyes reflected countless stars. Yet they held neither age nor youth, only timeless wisdom. The storyteller lowered his head, not because he was told to, but because every part of him sensed he stood before someone who belonged to another age. The stranger smiled gently. "Do not fear," he said. "I was once a keeper of these forests. long before your grandfather's grandfather first opened his eyes to this world. The storyteller whispered, "Are you alive?" The old guardian looked toward the stars. "Life and death are only rivers, child. I simply crossed before you did." The guardian raised one weathered hand. The glowing carvings upon the stones began to move. Spirals turned like slow rivers, symbols of birds, stags, the moon, and the sacred oak drifted through the air as living light. Then the guardian spoke. "Long ago, before kingdoms rose and before Rome marched across these lands, our people received a promise. As long as someone remembers the old stories, the spirit of the Celtic world will never truly disappear." The storyteller listened without speaking. The guardian's voice became softer. "But memory is fading. Children no longer hear the old songs. Sacred places fall into silence. And when the last story is forgotten, even the forest will forget our names." The storyteller felt a chill, unlike any winter wind. Could stories truly protect a people? Could memory itself be a form of life? The guardian answered before the question was spoken. "Yes. Stories are the heartbeat of those who came before us." As the final symbol faded into the night, the guardian extended his hand toward the storyteller. "Come. There is one memory you must witness with your own eyes." The forest disappeared, the stars vanished, and the world itself seemed to dissolve into light. The brilliant light slowly faded. The storyteller opened his eyes. He no longer stood inside the circle of ancient stones. Instead, he found himself beneath the largest tree he had ever seen. Its mighty branches stretched across the sky like the arms of an ancient giant. Its roots disappeared deep into earth, as though embracing the heart of the world itself. The air felt different here, peaceful, timeless. No birds sang, no wind stirred the leaves. Yet the entire forest seemed alive. The silver-haired guardian stood quietly beside him. "This," he whispered, "is the sacred oak, the oldest teacher our people have ever known." The storyteller reached out and gently placed his hand upon the rough bark. It felt warm, almost alive. The guardian smiled. "Our people never worshipped the tree itself. We honored what it taught us." He gently pointed toward the roots. "The roots remind us to never forget where we came from." His hand moved toward the mighty trunk. "The trunk teaches strength, not through force, but through patience." Finally, he looked upward. The branches reached toward the heavens, showing that wisdom grows only when we remain connected to both earth and sky. The storyteller gazed upward. Thousands of leaves shimmered softly. Each one reflected the morning sunlight. Each one seemed to whisper a forgotten lesson. The guardian closed his eyes. The oak has witnessed births, wars, harvests, and countless winters. It remembers every generation. Storyteller followed. Soon, they arrived at a peaceful clearing. Several young apprentices sat in a wide circle around elderly druids. No scrolls rested upon the ground. No tablets, no books, only listening. One druid recited a long poem. The students repeated every word, again and again. The guardian quietly explained. "Our wisdom was never written. Words carved into stone may survive, but living voices survive even longer." The storyteller watched as one apprentice flawlessly repeated hundreds of lines. Every story, every law, Every family history stored entirely within memory. Our greatest library, the Guardian whispered, was the human heart. As the lesson ended, one young apprentice pointed toward the sky. Dark clouds slowly drifted across the horizon. The elder druid smiled. "Tell me, what do they say?" The apprentice remained silent. The guardian spoke softly. "The druids believed that nature was always speaking. The flight of birds, the blooming of flowers, the changing stars, the flowing rivers. Nothing was random. They simply learned to notice what others ignored." The storyteller realized something profound. The druids did not believe themselves wiser than nature. They believed nature itself was the greatest teacher. The guardian led the storyteller deeper into the woodland. There, several druids carefully gathered herbs. One crushed fresh leaves into a clay bowl. Another mixed wild honey with fragrant flowers. Nearby, an injured child rested peacefully while an elderly healer gently treated a wounded arm. No magic, the guardian smiled. Only generations of careful observation. The forest gave medicine if one knew where to look. The storyteller watched as the child smiled with relief. The guardian continued. "The greatest healer is not the one who knows every plant. It is the one who never stops learning." As evening approached, the storyteller asked quietly, "Were the druids the rulers of the tribes?" The guardian gently shook his head. "No. Kings ruled by authority. Druids guided by wisdom. A wise king listened before acting. A foolish king ignored those who understood the forest." The storyteller remembered the villages he had seen, the warriors, the celebrations, the sacred fires. Now he understood. Behind every decision, there had always been quiet voices filled with patience. Voices that sought peace before conflict. The guardian smiled one final time. "The strongest tree is rarely the loudest." The sun slowly disappeared beyond the western hills. Golden light poured through the branches of the sacred oak. The guardian rested his hand upon the ancient trunk. "One day," he whispered, "these trees may fall. Our temples may vanish. Our names may fade. But if even one person remembers our stories, our people will never truly disappear." The storyteller placed his hand beside the guardian's. At that moment, he understood his purpose. He was not chosen to become a king, nor a warrior. He had been chosen to remember and to pass those memories to generations yet unborn. The forest grew quiet once more, but now, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt full of voices waiting to be heard. The first stars appeared above the darkening hills, across valleys, forests, and winding rivers. Families began their journey. Some walked for hours, others had traveled for days. Entire tribes moved together beneath the autumn sky. Warriors carried polished spears. Children held tightly to their parents' hands. Elders walked slowly, supported by carved wooden staffs. No tribe came to conquer. No king came to claim new lands. Tonight, every path led to the same sacred hill. The storyteller watched from a distance. Never before had he seen so many people gathered in peace. The silver-haired guardian smiled. "Tonight," he whispered, "they remember that before we belonged to different tribes, we all belonged to the same earth." As darkness covered the land, an unusual silence spread across every village. One by one, the hearth fires inside every home were allowed to die. No flames remained. the valleys became darker than at any other night of the year. The storyteller looked across the distant hills. Only darkness answered him. The guardian explained quietly. The old year must end completely, before the new one can begin. Every sorrow, every mistake, every burden is left behind with the dying embers. For several quiet moments, the Celtic world rested in complete darkness, high upon the sacred hill. The eldest druids stepped forward. Each carried an unlit torch. No one spoke, no child cried. Even the wind seemed to wait. The high druid knelt beside a carefully prepared circle of oak wood. He raised his hands toward the heavens. Ancient words filled the night. Words carried from generation to generation. Then, a single spark appeared. The dry oak branches caught fire, slowly, quietly, until an enormous flame rose into the night sky. Golden light spread across every face. Cheers did not erupt. Instead, people smiled through silent tears. The old year had ended. Hope had returned. As the great fire burned brighter, families approached one by one. Some carried freshly baked bread. Others brought apples, grain, flowers, or simple wooden carvings. Each offering was placed near the sacred fire, not as a gift to the flames, but as a symbol of gratitude. The guardian spoke softly. Our ancestors gave us life. They taught us to grow food, to build homes, to protect one another. Tonight, we remember them. The storyteller noticed elderly men quietly whispering forgotten names. Children listened with wide eyes. Names spoken centuries ago still lived, because someone chose to remember. As midnight approached, a cool mist drifted across the hill. The flames danced higher. Some believed they saw familiar faces within the smoke. Others quietly closed their eyes. No one shouted. No one ran. Fear had no place here. The guardian smiled. The veil is thin tonight. Whether spirits truly walk among us, or whether memory simply becomes stronger, only the heart can know. The storyteller gazed into the glowing fire. For a brief moment, he thought he saw his own ancestors smiling back at him. Not speaking, only watching, as if blessing the generations still to come. When the moon reached its highest point, a single elder began to sing. The melody was gentle, slow, ancient. Soon another voice joined, then another. Before long, thousands of voices echoed across the hills. The storyteller had never heard such beauty. There were no written lyrics. Every word had survived only through memory. Every generation carried the song forward. The guardian whispered, "One day, these voices will fall silent. But as long as someone remembers the melody, our people will never truly disappear." The storyteller quietly joined the song. For the first time, he understood that remembering was more than recalling the past. It was an act of love. Hours passed. The great fire slowly settled into glowing embers. One by one, families stepped forward. Each lit a small torch from the sacred flame. They carried that new fire home. It would warm their hearths, cook their meals, light their homes through the long winter. The storyteller watched the countless lights moving across the dark valleys. They looked like stars returning to the earth. The guardian smiled one final time. The fire is not merely wood and flame. It is hope. It is memory. It is every generation choosing to carry the light forward. As the first rays of dawn touched the hills, the storyteller knew his own journey was almost complete. Yet one final lesson still waited beyond the morning mist. The night had ended, but the world had not yet fully awakened. A deep silence stretched across the hills where the Great Bonfire once burned. Only glowing embers remained, softly breathing in the cold morning air. The storyteller stood alone. The silver-haired guardian was no longer beside him. The druids, the tribes, the songs, all had faded into memory like mist dissolving into dawn. For a moment, he wondered if it had all been a dream. But something within him had changed. Something permanent. The air felt lighter, yet heavier at the same time, as if he carried an unseen weight. Not of burden, but of meaning. He closed his eyes, and instantly, it returned. The circle of standing stones, the voice of the guardian, the ancient druids speaking of the sacred oak, the songs that carried across thousands of voices. None of it was gone. It was alive inside him, like fire that cannot be seen, but never truly dies. He understood something then. The Otherworld was not only a place beyond life, it was also a place within memory. And he had carried it back. He began to walk, slowly, through the forest path leading home. The trees were familiar, yet somehow different, as if they now recognized him. The wind moved gently through the branches, and for a brief moment, he thought he heard whispers. Not voices of spirits, not warnings, but echoes. Echoes of everything he had witnessed, every lesson, every symbol, every forgotten truth. The forest was no longer silent. It was remembering with him. As he walked further, the memories grew heavier, not painful, but profound. He realized something the guardian had never spoken directly. Wisdom is not given, it is carried, and what is carried must eventually be shared. Otherwise, it becomes lost. The voices of the druids would fade. The songs of Samhain would weaken. The memory of the sacred oak would disappear. Unless someone spoke them again. At last, the trees began to thin. The village appeared in the distance. Smoke rose gently from familiar chimneys. Life continued, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Children played near wooden huts. Elders prepared morning fires. The world seemed unchanged. But the storyteller knew otherwise. Everything had changed. Because now, someone remembered. That evening, the village gathered around a small fire. Not the Great Bonfire, but something simpler, warmer, human. The storyteller sat quietly for a long time. No one asked what he had seen. No one interrupted. They simply waited. Then, he began to speak. At first, his voice was uncertain, then stronger. He spoke of the sacred oak, of the druids, of the Otherworld, of Samhain Night when the veil became thin. The fire listened, so did the people, and for the first time, the memory of the Otherworld entered the human world again. As the fire dimmed, a soft wind passed through the village. The storyteller paused. For just a moment, he thought he saw a familiar figure standing beyond the firelight, the silver-haired guardian. He did not speak. He did not move. He only smiled, a silent farewell. Then he was gone. The storyteller understood. The guardian had never been meant to stay, only to remind him that memory must live among the living. Years passed. The storyteller grew older. His voice became steady, respected, known. But he was no warrior. He was no king. He became something more lasting, a keeper of stories, and as each generation came and went, he passed them forward. The Druids, the Oak, the Samhain Fire, the Otherworld. None of it was lost, because memory, when spoken aloud, becomes immortal. As the final embers of the fire faded into night, the storyteller looked toward the forest one last time and whispered softly, "Some worlds do not end, they are only remembered." And in that moment, the Celtic world lived again. Years turned into decades, decades turned into centuries, and the world changed. Forests once untouched were cleared for farms and roads. Stone paths became towns, towns became cities. The old ways of the Celts slowly faded from daily life, but not all things vanish with time. Some things simply transform. The sacred oak was no longer worshipped. The Druids no longer gathered in stone circles. The great fire of Samhain was no longer lit upon the hills. Yet something remained, invisible but alive. Memory, in quiet corners of the world. Stories still survived, whispered by elders, recorded in fragments, preserved in songs, legends, and myths. A hero who spoke with spirits, a forest where the veil grew thin, a sacred tree that connected earth and sky, a fire that marked the turning of time. They were no longer called history. They were called folklore, but their meaning remained unchanged. They still carried the voice of those who once lived beneath ancient skies. The storyteller, now old, sat beside a small evening fire. His hair had turned silver. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice remained steady. He looked at the younger generation gathered before him and asked a simple question. If a people are no longer seen, are they truly gone? Silence followed. Only the fire answered with soft crackling sounds. Then he spoke again. No. A people do not disappear when their villages fall. They disappear only when no one remembers their story. The children listened closely. Some did not fully understand, but they would remember the feeling. And that feeling would carry forward. The storyteller closed his eyes, and for the last time, he saw it all again. The mist-covered forests, the druids beneath the oak, the glowing stone circles, the Samhain bonfire lighting the night sky, the voices of thousands singing together. It was no longer a past he had visited. It was a world that still existed inside memory. He understood then. The Celtic world was never truly destroyed. It simply became invisible, living in stories, sleeping in songs, waiting in the silence between words. The storyteller's breath grew slower. The fire beside him dimmed gently. The voices around him softened, and then, peace. His final thought was not of loss, but of continuation. Somewhere, someone would tell the story again. Perhaps a child, perhaps a stranger, perhaps a voice carried through time itself. And in that moment, he was no longer alone, because every listener became a keeper. Long after the storyteller was gone, the forest still whispered. The wind still moved through ancient trees. Rivers still carried memory in their flow. And every time someone spoke a forgotten story, the Celtic world returned. Not as it was, but as it always was meant to be. Alive in remembrance. Because as long as even one voice speaks the old names, the past never truly ends. It only waits. The journey of the Celtic world does not end here. It continues in every story told, in every memory kept alive, and in every heart that still listens to the past.